The vault was built to be impenetrable, but they didn't burrow through the walls, the floor, or the door. They dug a tunnel straight out of a Hollywood heist film, and for one dizzying weekend they got away with the largest cash theft in Brazilian history. Our story begins not with the crime itself, but with the quiet, almost invisible man who would become its unlikely architect. His name was Luis Fernando Ribeiro, though to those in his orbit, he was simply the quiet neighbor, the unassuming family man. He wasn't a muscle-bound enforcer or a flamboyant criminal mastermind. He was a former bank security guard, a man who knew the system from the inside. He understood the rhythms of a bank, the blind spots in security protocols, and the hypnotic allure of the one place everyone assumed was safe, the Banco Central in Fortaleza, Brazil. Luis Fernando was a planner, a man of infinite patience, and he spent 3 years meticulously crafting a blueprint for the impossible. He assembled a crew of over 24 men, not from the usual criminal fraternity, but from a cross-section of the working class. Bricklayers, miners, drivers. They were men lured by the promise of a life-altering score, men who knew how to work with their hands and keep their mouths shut. Their base of operations was as audacious as their plan. They rented a small, nondescript house just 130 meters from the bank's back wall. To the neighbors, they were a group of quiet landscapers, their property often filled with bags of soil and the sound of digging. No one could have guessed that the soil was a perfect alibi, and the digging was the key to everything. For 2 long months, the men worked in shifts, 24 hours a day, in a claustrophobic tunnel that stretched from the house's living room towards the heart of the bank. The engineering was staggering. They shored up the walls with wood and plastic sheeting. They installed electric lighting and a rudimentary ventilation system using plastic pipes that snaked up to the surface, disguised as drain pipes. They used a sophisticated GPS device to ensure their path was precise, navigating a labyrinth of sewer lines and utility cables. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and sweat, the silence broken only by the scrape of shovels and the low hum of a generator. They worked with the grim determination of ants, moving tons of soil, which they packed into bags and stored in the house's garage and spare rooms, slowly turning the building into a powder keg of evidence. The final obstacle was the 2-foot-thick reinforced concrete of the bank's vault floor. This required heavier tools, sledgehammers and jackhammers. The noise was immense, a percussive roar that should have been a dead giveaway. But Luis Fernando had timed it perfectly. They worked through a noisy holiday weekend, their racket masked by the city's celebrations, a symphony of fireworks and music that provided the perfect acoustic cover for the final assault on the vault. On the night of August 6, 2005, they broke through. One of the men, his face smeared with dirt, would later recall the moment the jackhammer bit broke through the last layer of concrete. There was a rush of cool, clean air, he said, and then silence. They lowered themselves into the one place no one was ever supposed to enter by force, the currency vault of the Banco Central. What they found defied imagination. The room was stacked floor to ceiling with used banknotes, bills that had been taken out of circulation and were waiting to be counted and shredded. It wasn't loose cash, it was bundled and sealed in thick, heavy plastic bricks. The sheer volume was overwhelming. They had anticipated a quick grab, but this was a warehouse. They worked frantically through the night, a human chain passing the heavy bundles back through the narrow tunnel. The work was backbreaking. One of the crew, exhausted, reportedly muttered, "There's too much. We can't take it all." But they tried. For hours, they moved an estimated 3.5 tons of cash, a total of 164,743,000 Brazilian reals. When the sun rose on August 7th, the vault was noticeably emptier, and the house on 83 Rua dos Lírios was filled with the equivalent of nearly $70 million USD. The discovery, when it came, was one of pure, dumbfounded shock. Bank employees arrived on Monday morning to a scene of surreal devastation. The vault floor was a gaping, raw hole, like a wound. Dirt and debris were everywhere. And the money, a colossal portion of it, was simply gone. The initial assumption was an inside job. a betrayal from within the bank's own ranks. How else could such a thing be possible? The local police were equally baffled. The case was immediately handed over to the federal police, who descended upon the bank. The evidence was paradoxical. The breach was both incredibly sophisticated and strangely crude. The tunnel was an engineering marvel, but the crime scene was a mess, littered with fingerprints, DNA, and a treasure trove of physical evidence. The first major break came from a simple, almost laughable clue. The thieves, in their haste, had left behind a single, crucial tool, a cordless drill, and etched into its plastic housing was a serial number. The police traced it to a local hardware store, where security footage and a receipt led them directly to one of the crew members. It was a catastrophic, amateur mistake in an otherwise professional operation. The house of cards began to tremble. The investigation exploded into action. Federal police fanned out across Fortaleza, following the trail of the drill and the testimonies of neighbors who had finally started to talk. They spoke of the strange comings and goings at the little house, the bags of soil, the constant noise. When police raided the house, they found the ultimate smoking gun, the tunnel's entrance hidden under a rug, and the entire building stuffed to the rafters with bags of soil, the undeniable geological fingerprint of their crime. The noose tightened quickly. Arrests were made, one after another. The crew, bound by money but not by loyalty, began to turn on each other. They were small-time criminals suddenly sitting on a mountain of cash they couldn't spend, and the pressure was immense. Luis Fernando Ribeiro, the quiet architect, was one of the first to be caught. He was arrested trying to board a bus, a bag of cash at his feet. He offered no resistance, his face a mask of weary resignation. The mastermind was in custody, but the money, the staggering, life-altering mountain of cash, had already begun to vanish into the underworld. What followed was a courtroom drama that captivated the nation. The trial was less about whether they did it, the evidence was overwhelming, and more about the sheer audacity of the crime. The defendants, now cleaned up and wearing suits, sat in a stark contrast to the gritty images of their tunnel. The prosecution painted them as cunning criminals who had attacked the very symbol of the nation's financial security. The defense argued they were desperate men, products of a system that offered them few opportunities, who had executed a victimless crime. After all, the money was destined for destruction. But then came the twists that elevated the story from a simple heist to a dark, true crime saga. Testimony revealed that the plan was even more elaborate than initially thought. They had allegedly bribed a police officer to act as a lookout during the heist. More shockingly, rumors swirled that not all of the crew had been caught, that a shadowy financier, a silent partner, had bankrolled the operation, and walked away with a significant portion of the loot, never to be identified. The true climax, the shocking revelation that changed everything, came from the forensic accountants. As they traced the meager amounts of recovered cash, a horrifying truth emerged. This was not a victimless crime. The money, though destined for shredding, was still the property of the Brazilian people. The theft created a massive financial hole, and the investigation and recovery efforts cost the public millions. The real cost was not just the missing reels, but the shattered illusion of security, the brazen proof that no institution was truly safe. In the end, justice was served, but it was a partial, messy victory. Luis Fernando Ribeiro and several of his key lieutenants were sentenced to decades in prison. To date, less than 20 million reals of the stolen 164 million have ever been recovered. The rest dissolved into the economy, funding other criminal enterprises, changing unknown lives in untold ways. The house on Rua dos Lirios was demolished, the tunnel filled with concrete, a symbolic attempt to bury the memory of the crime. But the legend persists, a testament to human ingenuity, greed, and the terrifying fact that sometimes the most incredible fictions are true. The thieves proved that with enough patience and nerve, you could reach into the most fortified heart of the system and tear out its riches, leaving behind only a gaping hole and an unanswerable question. They proved that the most impenetrable fortresses are often weakest from below. If stories like this keep you hooked, hit subscribe for more.